You have eaten Oreos your entire life. You know exactly what they're supposed to taste like. Slightly bitter chocolate cookie, sweet, almost vanilla cream, that specific snap when you twist them. But here's a question no one is asking. When did you last actually taste an Oreo and think, this is exactly the same as when I was a kid? Because it isn't the same. And Nabisco, the company that owns Oreo, has never once announced a recipe change. No press release, no updated packaging, no apology. Just a quietly, almost surgically altered product that hundreds of millions of people eat every single year without realizing what they lost. Today we're going to find out exactly what happened to the original Oreo recipe, when it changed, why it changed, and who made the decision, and why they didn't want you to know. Oreo is not just a cookie. It is the best-selling cookie in the entire world. Every single year, more than 40 billion Oreos are produced. That number is so large it's hard to process. It's roughly 5 cookies for every living human being on the planet. The cookie was introduced in 1912 by the National Biscuit Company, Nabisco, in New York City. It was revolutionary for its time. 2 chocolate wafers sandwiching a sweet cream filling. Simple, elegant, addictive. For decades, the recipe stayed essentially the same. And then, somewhere between the 1990s and the 2010s, depending on which aspect you're tracking, the Oreo quietly transformed. The cookie you're eating today is not the cookie your parents ate in 1975. And the difference isn't nostalgia, it's chemistry. So let's break it down, piece by piece. And we'll start with the most controversial ingredient in Oreo history, lard. For most of its early history, the Oreo creme filling contained lard, real, rendered animal fat. This was not some back-alley shortcut. Lard was a completely standard baking ingredient at the time, widely used across the American food industry. It gave the filling a specific texture, slightly dense, with a fatty richness that balanced the bitterness of the cocoa wafers. The cookie wafers themselves were also different. The chocolate used was more intensely bitter, closer to what bakers would call Dutch-processed cocoa with a sharper edge. The overall cookie was less sweet than it is today, and more complex. Then came the 1990s health crisis, and it changed everything. In the late 1980s and through the 1990s, trans fats, specifically partially hydrogenated oils, became the villain of American nutrition. The science was clear and damning. Trans fats dramatically raised LDL, bad, cholesterol, and lowered HDL, good, cholesterol, increasing the risk of heart disease more than any other dietary fat. Nabisco, like virtually every major food company, had already replaced lard with partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, a trans fat, sometime in the mid-20th century, partly for cost reasons, and partly to appeal to consumers who thought vegetable shortening sounded healthier than animal fat. But now those same hydrogenated oils were under fire. A massive public backlash was building, and by the early 2000s, the pressure had become impossible to ignore. In May 2003, a lawyer named Stephen Joseph filed a lawsuit in California seeking to ban the sale of Oreos to children in the state. His argument was straightforward. Oreos contained trans fats from partially hydrogenated oils, and trans fats were scientifically proven to be harmful, especially to developing children. Nabisco, he argued, should be held liable. The lawsuit was actually withdrawn just weeks later. Joseph himself dropped it, saying his real goal had never been a courtroom victory. It was publicity. He wanted to force a public conversation about trans fats in processed foods. And it worked. The media coverage was enormous. For many Americans, this was the first time they had ever heard the term trans fat attached to a specific product they loved. The story ran on CNN, in the New York Times, on morning talk shows. And Nabisco was suddenly facing a PR crisis over a cookie. Nabisco's parent company at the time, Kraft Foods, moved quickly. Within months, they announced they would reformulate Oreos to remove trans fats. And by 2006, ahead of the FDA's new trans fat labeling requirements, the new Oreo hit shelves. The announcement was framed entirely as good news. Healthier Oreos. Same great taste, no trans fats. But no one asked the obvious question, if you pull out the ingredient that gives the filling its texture and taste, what do you replace it with? The answer was palm oil and canola oil, a blend of non-hydrogenated vegetable fats. These are genuinely better for cardiovascular health than trans fats. On that specific metric, Nabisco told the truth. But here's what they didn't tell you. Palm oil and canola oil behave completely differently in a cookie filling. The original shortening, whether lard or its hydrogenated replacement, was semi-solid at room temperature. It gave the cream that characteristic dense, slightly waxy texture that holds together when you bite or twist. The new oil blend is softer, more liquid at room temperature. To compensate and maintain structural integrity, Nabisco adjusted the ratio of powdered sugar in the filling, making it sweeter. They also tweaked the emulsifiers. The result is a filling that is noticeably sweeter and slightly less firm than the original, and it doesn't stop there. The cocoa wafers also changed. To keep costs controlled and to maintain a consistent dark color without using expensive high-quality cocoa, the processing of the cocoa was adjusted. Modern Oreo wafers use more heavily alkalized cocoa, sometimes called black cocoa, which produces the deep, almost black color you see today, but has a less complex, more uniformly bitter flavor profile than the original. Together, these changes produced a cookie that looks identical to the original, same diameter, same embossed pattern, same package, but tastes measurably different. Sweeter overall, less nuanced, more like sugar and chocolate, as separate elements rather than a balanced combination. And there's one more piece to the story that almost nobody is talking about. The original Oreo was not kosher certified, in part because of the milk derivatives sometimes present in the manufacturing process and the lard in early recipes. But the reformulation, specifically the removal of animal fats and certain dairy-adjacent ingredients, made Oreos eligible for a different kind of certification. This matters because for years, many vegans assumed that since Oreos no longer contained lard, they were vegan-friendly. Nabisco's own website eventually addressed this directly, stating that while Oreos don't contain animal ingredients, they are produced on equipment shared with milk, making them unsuitable for people with dairy allergies, and, technically, not vegan under strict definitions. What's significant here is that the reformulation was driven not just by health pressure, but by a constellation of market forces, health-conscious consumers, religious dietary requirements, allergen liability, and manufacturing efficiency. The taste of the cookie was only one factor, and arguably not the most important one, in the decision to change the recipe. That, in a single sentence, is the story of how almost every iconic processed food changes over time. Not through dramatic announcement, but through a quiet accumulation of regulatory pressure, cost optimization, and shifting consumer demographics. The product stays the same. The recipe doesn't. Here's the darkest part of this story, and the part that Nabisco understands better than almost anyone. It doesn't actually matter that the recipe changed, because the part of the Oreo that was scientifically optimized to be addictive was never really the taste. In 2013, a neuroscience study at Connecticut College found that Oreos activated the pleasure center of rat brains, the nucleus accumbens, as strongly as cocaine or morphine. The researchers were careful to note this doesn't mean Oreos are literally as dangerous as hard drugs, but it does illustrate the power of the sugar-fat-salt combination that Nabisco had engineered into the cookie. And here's the sinister genius of the reformulation. The new recipe is actually higher in sugar per serving than the old one. By removing the fat-dense shortening and compensating with more powdered sugar, Nabisco inadvertently, or perhaps deliberately, made the cookie hit the brain's reward system even faster. Fat slows the absorption of sugar. Less fat means a quicker sugar spike. A quicker spike means a faster dopamine release. And a faster release means you want another one sooner. The reformulation was sold to us as a health improvement, and in the narrow sense of fewer trans fats, it was. But in the broader sense of engineering a food that your brain finds it difficult to stop eating, the new Oreo is arguably more effective than the original. They didn't make it healthier. They made it better at making you want more. So here's what we know for certain about the original Oreo recipe and what happened to it. The original recipe used lard, then partially hydrogenated vegetable shortening, a trans fat, which gave the creme filling its distinctive, dense, slightly waxy texture and rich flavor. In 2006, following public and regulatory pressure around trans fats, Nabisco reformulated the filling to use a blend of palm oil and canola oil, a genuine cardiovascular health improvement, but one that required compensating with more sugar to maintain texture. The cocoa wafers also changed over time, shifting toward more heavily alkalized black cocoa that produces the iconic dark color, but a simpler, less nuanced chocolate flavor. None of this was announced. None of it appeared in any marketing. The package looks identical. The branding is identical. Only the chemistry is different. And that's the thing that should actually bother us. Not that the recipe changed, but that we were never told. You are one of the most loyal consumers in American food history. You have bought the same product for decades. You deserve to know what you were buying. Next time you twist one open, and yes, you will, you'll be tasting a product that was quietly re-engineered to be cheaper to make, legally safer to sell, and, not entirely by accident, harder to stop eating. The cookie didn't get better, it got optimized. There's a difference. Now, speaking of iconic American products with secret recipe histories, have you ever wondered why Coca-Cola changed its formula in 1985? The whole world lost their minds, and the company brought back the original, except food historians believe the original they brought back wasn't actually the original at all. Subscribe, hit the bell, and drop in the comments. Do you think you can actually taste the difference between an Oreo from 1985 and one today? Or is it all in our heads?